right, let's look at the problem that we were looking at in 12.2, where we were asked to set the marginal average cost equal to 0 so we can minimize our average cost. We ended up getting a quadratic equation where we had a 3x squared minus 480x minus 120, and we needed to solve that. So what you could do is you could use quadratic formula. You could factor out a 3, a GCF, and use the 1, the negative 160, and the negative 40 as your A, B, and C. Or you can use the 3, the negative 480, and the negative 120 as your A, B, and C in your quadratic formula. Those two ways would work. Or for some of you guys that know how to use your calculator or are curious of how to use your calculator, we can actually use our calculator to help us find the zeros or the solutions to this quadratic equation. If you notice in my calculator that I've entered my equation into my y equals. So pause the video and do that now. I've noticed that my numbers are pretty big. So what I'm going to do, instead of looking at a standard window, 10 by 10, I'm going to go into Window, and I'm going to change my window. I want to know where it touches, where the graph touches the x-axis. And I really, on this problem, aren't quite concerned with negatives because I think this was talking about bicycles, right? Something like that. And we can't sell a negative amount. So I really don't care about the time that it crosses on the negative. But I might want to see it just to double check. But it should look like a parabola and it should touch the x twice. We should have two answers. So I want to make sure that I can see the whole graph so I can find the two places that it touches the x-axis. Because both of them might be positive and I might have two possible answers. But if any of them are negative, it wouldn't make sense in context to this problem. So I'm going to do a minimum x of negative 5 and a maximum x of, 200. I just picked a number. If I need to, I can zoom it out more and more and more by making that bigger or less and making it smaller. I'm going to have the x scale go up by 1s. I'm going to also make the y, so how big it is here, from negative 5 to 5. I really don't need to see the whole entire graph. I'm really just kind of focused in on this little part here. So I'm going to make my y minimum negative 5 and my y maximum positive 5, and then my y scale is going to go up by 1. So mine looks something like this, and I'm going to push graph. You might see that that blue line, it kind of went quickly, but that's the first line of my parabola, and then here's the second line of my parabola. So it looks like it touches twice. I want to find those two spots where it touches. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to find the zeros. Now if I'm looking at this equation and I want to find this 0, what I'm going to do is it's going to ask me for the left bound. Well, if I'm coming from the left of this 0 is on top and right of this 0 is on bottom. So when it asks me for left bound, I'm going to go up to the top and push enter. When it asks me for right bound, I'm going to go below and push enter. We're going to do that to find that 0. Are you ready? All right, I'm going to go second, trace, and I'm going to choose number 2 for zeros. You notice on the bottom it asks me for a left bound. So I'm going to move my cursor, and it's hard to tell, so you might have to look at the numbers below. I'm going to move my cursor. Remember, we want to move the cursor up here into the positive values to the left of that first 0. So I want to move it, move it, move it, move it, move it. I'm at x equals 54 right now. I probably need to go a lot more over. Wait to that y. Oh, did you see that my y jumped to positive numbers? So now that my y jumped to positive, I know I'm way over here to the left, and I'm going to push enter. So it's going to kind of cut it off right there. It's going to also ask me for a right bound, so I need to go below that 0 because I want to go to the right of it. So I'm going to move my cursor until it goes below the x-axis. Do you notice that my y is turned to negative all of a sudden? So I just jumped from up here to below here. I was left bound, and now I'm right bound, right of it. And I'm going to push enter. The last thing it's going to do is ask me to guess, and I'm just going to push enter. And your calculator is going to do its magic, and it's going to find the 0 at negative 0.25, right? Which is what we said before, but negative 0.25 doesn't make sense when we're talking about the number of bikes or motors or whatever this example was about. And so I can cross off that 0. But I do need to make sure that I find this number, this 0. So when I go to do that process, again, I'm going to do it for this next 0. Again, it's going to ask me for left bound. If I was following my path, left bound this time would be below my 0. And if I were following my path, right bound would be above. So now I want to go left bound below and right bound above. Here we go. I have second trace zeros. I'm going to move my cursor, and it's going to take me a while because I know I have to go really far over. So my graph is kind of going down, and I've got to follow it all the way down. But I want to stay negative, right? And then as soon as it hits positive, I need to go back because I want to stay negative if I want to be left bound. So I'm going to go negative, negative, negative. My y value is negative. It's getting more negative. It's getting more negative. My y value is getting more negative. Uh-oh, it's getting less negative. Do you see it? It's getting less negative, so it looks like we're coming back up this parabola. It's getting less negative, less negative, less negative. My y value is getting less negative. Uh-oh, it just jumped to positive. So let's go back. Let's go back until it's negative, right? Because I want to make sure that I'm left of this 0. So I want to be down here in the negative values. So I want to make sure that my y value is negative so that I'm to the left of my 0, below. I'm going to push enter. Then I want to go to the right of it, which is above. So I'm going to push enter, or not enter, but I'm going to move my arrow until I'm above the x-axis, so positive y's. Push enter. It's going to ask me to guess, so I'm going to push enter again, and I end up getting my 0. That 1 to the e, 1 times e to the negative 1 is just kind of like a scientific notation idea of 0. And my 0 is x equals 160.25. So I have my 2 zeros that we said we would get whether we did the quadratic formula or we used our calculator. And I know it took a little bit of time to do that in our calculator, but the more you do that, the faster you'll become. And so it's kind of nice to use this cool, expensive calculator to have it solve things for you without always having to do the quadratic formula. So practice doing that, putting your equation in y equals and using that second trace zeros function to find all of your answers or your zeros.